All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the intensely high-stakes world of global biodiversity loss. Often when we think about conservation, we picture these rugged rangers on the ground, navigating tough terrain, or scientists in the field tracking flocks through binoculars. But today we're going to examine the hidden, incredibly rigorous bureaucratic machinery that is actually required to fight this loss on a global scale. We're looking at the exact anatomy of a global conservation mission and the massive amount of paperwork that literally makes all that fieldwork possible. So let's start with this massive geographic puzzle. Just think about the sheer scale of a migratory route for a second. A falcon might start its week up in northern Europe, fly across the Mediterranean, and end up deep in the African continent. That is dozens of sovereign jurisdictions in just a few days. And here's the kicker. Threats to these migratory birds of prey, they do not respect national borders. The bird has absolutely no idea it just left a protected airspace and entered a zone with zero environmental regulation. If we pour millions into protecting a species in one specific nation, but that flock flies directly into danger the literal second it crosses a border, the entire conservation effort completely falls apart. So how do we solve this massive borderless puzzle? Enter the Raptor's MOU. Operating under the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species, which is basically the ultimate global authority on cross-border wildlife, this framework specifically targets birds of prey across Africa and Eurasia. It acts as the definitive administrative bedrock, trying its best to synchronize conservation policies across entire continents. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the migratory raptor crisis. Second, we'll look inside the Raptor's MOU. Third, the 5 pillars of the role. Fourth, action plans and transboundary threats. And finally, number 5, the challenge of specialized conservation. Kicking things off with part 1. The migratory raptor crisis and those massive cross-border threats. Think about the contrast here between localized human activities and their devastating transboundary impacts. It's fascinating, really. Migrating flocks naturally bottleneck, right? They funnel through these highly specific, narrow geographic corridors just to cross a sea or a mountain range. Because of this massive concentration, a farmer misusing agricultural pesticides in one specific valley can inadvertently trigger a poisoning crisis that ripples across the entire African and Eurasian flyway. Poorly designed power lines in one small region, that can lead to the widespread electrocution of thousands of birds just passing through for a few days. You absolutely cannot fix these transboundary impacts by talking to one local government. You have to coordinate across the whole map. Moving on to part 2, inside the Raptor's MOU, specifically looking at the Abu Dhabi Coordinating Unit. Saving these birds requires a very specific type of leader. We're talking about a P4 Program Management Officer, which is a highly senior, incredibly demanding UN designation. This person is essentially the unsung hero of transboundary conservation. It requires this rare, deeply demanding hybrid skills. They have to blend deep, technical avian biology with rigorous, high-level institutional management. So they aren't just bird experts. They are diplomats, administrators, and strategic visionaries all rolled into one, operating out of the nerve center in Abu Dhabi to keep this entire global mission from just unraveling. Which brings us to part 3, the 5 pillars of the role. Let's look at the actual blueprint. This job requires incredible diplomatic skill, just as seamlessly engage signatory states alongside all these non-governmental partners. The officer is constantly changing hats. First, they manage the MOU processes and secretariat functions. That's the daily, rigorous machinery of the treaty itself. Second, they pivot straight to the field, driving the actual action plans and threat reduction initiatives. Third, they put on their marketing hat for communications and resource mobilization, making sure the world actually cares and the money flows. Fourth, they build vital partnerships across the broader CMS family. And fifth, they manage all the dense finance, administrative, and supervisory duties required by the UN system. And the strategic guide doesn't just offer loose, vague suggestions for these pillars. It translates them into exactly 50 distinct strategic points to orient a new officer. 50. This is a highly structured, comprehensive operating manual designed to ensure absolutely nothing falls through the cracks when you're managing international wildlife treaties. But wait, it gets heavier. Every single one of those 50 points is rigorously analyzed across 10 recurring dimensions. We're talking about assessing stakeholder landscapes, operational risks, capacity building, technology, long-term impact, everything. That is a matrix of 500 distinct strategic considerations this one officer has to balance just to keep the unit afloat. There's this awe-inspiring contrast here, isn't there, between the absolute wild, untamed nature of a soaring eagle and the rigid, incredibly complex UN machinery required to ensure it stays in the sky. There's a brilliant quote from the source material that really hits the nail on the head. It says, "Early and sustained investment in this area is a form of preventive institutional insurance." We so often think of bureaucracy as a hurdle, but in the realm of global conservation, it's the bedrock. Without this exact administrative insurance, the entire transboundary mission to save these raptors would instantly collapse into isolated, completely ineffective regional projects. All right, part 4. Action plans and transboundary threats. Let's talk about the flagships. So the officer must advance 2 highly specialized flagship action plans simultaneously: the Vulture's Multi-Species Action Plan and the Soccer Falcon Global Action Plan. And this requires some incredibly careful balancing, because the range states, the actual countries these birds inhabit or fly over, are completely different for each species. Vultures are scavengers, right? They're facing massive poisoning threats across vast agricultural land masses in Africa and Asia. Meanwhile, the soccer falcon faces totally distinct challenges related to specialized hunting and illegal trade in entirely different regions. Yet this single coordinating unit has to act as the nerve center for both wildly different challenges. The ultimate takeaway here is that addressing these threats is so much more than field work. It's an exercise in massive multi-jurisdictional coordination. The officer is continuously supporting signatories, helping them develop national strategies, drafting complex technical and policy-oriented papers, and coordinating expert interventions. It's about getting dozens of completely independent, sovereign nations to act in perfect alignment. You just can't rely on isolated country-by-country interventions. And finally, part 5, the challenge of specialized conservation and what it takes to sustain this mission. Okay, imagine orchestrating a permanent, continent-spanning safety net for wildlife, only to have your own administrative foundation operating on a precarious 1-year ticking clock. That is the crazy bureaucratic reality of this immense global mission. The role is tied to an initial 1-year project appointment that relies entirely on the continued availability of donor money just to keep the lights on and the flyways safe. It's a constant struggle. The climax of this role is fighting to keep a highly specialized, taxonomically focused instrument visible, meaning making sure the world doesn't forget about these specific birds of prey while global donor priorities constantly shift to the newest trending crisis. The global funding landscape is intensely competitive. Donors change their priorities all the time. So this officer isn't just managing the science, they're constantly advocating for why migratory birds of prey matter, ensuring the Raptor's MOU's distinct contributions stay funded. So what does this all mean? Will the next program management officer manage to secure the future of our flyways? Or will shifting global priorities leave these raptors permanently grounded? Take a moment to consider just how fragile the administrative backbone of global wildlife conservation truly is. The survival of species spanning 2 whole continents rests heavily on the shoulders of a specialized coordination unit, and their ability to navigate funding cycles, diplomatic negotiations, and UN bureaucracy. It's a massive, high-stakes balancing act where the paperwork is literally just as critical as the fieldwork. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep your eyes on the skies and on the policies that protect them.